Start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should be good.
Okay, it is 10:10 and we will call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. Yes, sorry. Good morning. It's 10:10 and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Brenton, would you mind calling the roll?
Sure. All right, Miss Artis,
Present.
Mr. Blinsky, Miss Hano, Ms. Cowitz,
Present.
Dr. Mita, Mr. Piontek, Miss Reed,
Here.
Mr. Rocca,
Here.
Mr. Taylor,
Yeah.
Ms. Sashery,
Here.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have exactly a quorum, 6.
Thanks, Brenton. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone of a few rules for committee members and members of the public attending in person. Please raise your hand to speak and wait to be recognized by the chair before speaking. To help the meeting run smoothly, please keep side conversations to a minimum and comments related to the topic we are discussing. For those committee members who are attending virtually, remember you must be on camera and have your first and last name showing to be counted toward our quorum. Please keep microphones muted unless called upon by the chair. Electronically raise your hand to request to speak and wait to be called on by the chair. For attendees, electronically raise your hand to request to speak. Once recognized by the chair, your microphone will be turned on. After speaking, the microphone will be returned to mute. Also, the Q&A is to only be used for those needing an ADA accommodation to participate in the meeting. Public comment will not be accepted via the Q&A except for those individuals who requested the accommodation. As for order, committee members in person and virtually will be allowed to speak first. Public members in person will then be called on, followed by the public participating virtually who have their hands raised. Comments in the Q&A will be addressed last. As with all hybrid meetings, it can be difficult to keep track of all who's wanting to speak in person and virtually. Please be patient. All comments and questions from committee members and the public may be limited to 3 minutes or less, should be run into time constraints. So please keep that in mind. Also, comments about a person's character will not be allowed. Finally, members of the public will have the opportunity to provide public comment before each vote and during designated public comment periods. The chair may also use their discretion to determine if comments will be accepted outside of those times. Before we begin our discussion of the community input ideas received and how to determine our recommendation for the council's advocacy agenda, I'd like to turn things over to the staff so they can share a bit about the committee's purpose and walk us through the documents you received in your packets.
That's me.
That's you.
Okay. Hey, everybody. This is Brenton, by the way. First, I want to just say a quick thanks to our agency folks that were able to attend. They are not on the committee, but as you guys have seen in the information that was sent to you for this meeting, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of information about different services, different things that are happening in the community, different programs. And so our agency folks are the experts in that area, more so than staff a lot of times and more so than a lot of folks here on the committee. So we always ask them to come. They are not voting members. Again, they're just here to provide you with information. So thank y'all for taking the time to come and help us out throughout this conversation. Oh, I thought you were saying something. Okay. The purpose of this committee, this is the second time we've had this committee. Last year was our first time. And for those of you that are that have been around for a while, you'll remember what the process used to be. For those of you that are a little bit newer, our old process used to be the council at their October meeting every year in the morning would kind of hash out what they wanted their advocacy agenda to be for the upcoming legislative session. And that took up quite a bit of time. It took up quite a few hours sometimes. I think 5 hours was or maybe even 6, which is almost the entire meeting, was one of the meetings that I can recall. And it's one of those things, there was not enough time to really hash out some of the information. You get some of the documents, or you would get some of the documents that we've given you, but you didn't really have time to discuss. There was a lot of work that had to be done by the entire council on the front end. Our LaCan leaders and Families Helping Families directors would get together every year, and they would do a legislative kickoff. And they would review information about what's going on in the state and kind of provide the council with a recommendation that sometimes the council accepts, sometimes they do not accept all of it. That is the council's right to do so. And that doesn't change with this committee. You are going to be kind of filling in for that kickoff, right? You are an ad hoc that's going to create a recommendation of things you think the council should advocate for in the upcoming session in 2026. Session starts March 9th, I believe, and it goes through June 1st. And so you're going to provide that recommendation. That recommendation is going to go to the full council at their October meeting, which is on the 30th, I think is the full meeting.
29 and 30.
Yep, so 29th will be those committee meetings, 30th will be the full meeting, so the vote is gonna happen on the 30th that morning. You know, if you wanna come in your Halloween costumes. I'll see if I can come in mine. So this year, we did it a little bit differently than we did last year. So last year, there still was a kickoff that the LaCan leaders and the Families Helping Families directors participated in, and kind of provided this committee with a recommendation. This year, we're doing it a little bit differently with effort and trying to, you know, be a little more efficient. It was kind of, we were having the same conversations in our legislative kickoff with our leaders and directors that we then had in this committee again. So what we did was the community input information that you received, that was compiled throughout the course of meetings in July and August that our LaCan leaders hosted. Basically, for anyone in the public to come out and share their ideas, share what's going on in their lives, what's going on in their communities, what they've noticed at a state level, what are the problems out there. And that information is compiled and it is sent to the leaders and the Families Helping Families directors. And they go through and kind of look at the information that was provided and sort of give you feedback to this committee. That's what that long document is of the community input information. And they kind of let you know what they think might be a statewide issue, what they think might be something that can be addressed legislatively, and what they think are priorities based on information that they're hearing from their respective areas in the state that they cover. And then that comes to you. And then you will be responsible for going through all of that information and deciding what's most important, what's also achievable. And that's what gets us into the first document that Keisha has pulled up for us. And it is the document that's after the agenda in your packet. This is just a very plain, simple guide to help you sort of understand what you need to be looking for in creating an advocacy agenda. For one, it needs to be a statewide issue. So this is something we're going to be addressing in legislative session, and so it needs to apply to the state, or at least a majority of the state, something that our legislators can fund or create policy around or create legislation around. If it is something that is isolated, maybe it's just a problem in one corner of the state, that's not a statewide issue. While it might be an important issue, it's not necessarily something that goes on the council's advocacy agenda. We talk with our LaCan leaders and our Families Helping Families directors, and they're very good when those issues do come up, speaking with those individuals that have those issues and guiding them in advocacy in their local area. Because sometimes this needs to be addressed by parish councils, or this needs to be addressed by a particular school board, or it needs to be addressed by the mayor, or that particular sort of idea. Another thing you need to look at is is it something that can be done legislatively? I think that's where folks get confused sometimes whenever we say an advocacy agenda. That's why I like to try to remember to make sure I say legislative advocacy agenda. Because those are two different things. An advocacy agenda is anything that you need to advocate for, and that could be policies, that could be rules, and those things aren't legislatively done necessarily. So you're looking at things that we can go to the Capitol, we can go to the legislature and ask them to do something. Or educate them on a particular issue and let them figure out how to do it, right? We don't want a lot. So that's one thing you have to keep in mind. Is this a legislative item? Because there are some things in there that you could see that are likely policy type things, where we might need to go to Rehabilitation Services, LRS, or we might need to go to LDA, Department of Health, and say, we need to change this particular rule that you have in place. And those things are done through administrative advocacy, which could be taken on by staff, or it can be maybe a couple of council members that are having those conversations with the department, trying to make those changes. It could also be things that might go on your action plan. These are really good things to think about, because in March, not only does the legislative session start, that's about the time frame that you as a full council, those of you on the committee that are on the council, are going to be thinking about what's going to go in your fiscal year 27 plan. And so that some of these things might be actual initiatives that we could do and not necessarily something that you're going to tackle during legislative session. Let's see. Will this issue resonate with our grassroots advocacy membership? Will they respond and take action? You can put anything on your agenda. You just need to make sure that it's going to resonate with the people, because they are the ones that are going to go out there and do the heavy lifting. There are some of our council members who do advocate, and we always encourage more participation from our council. But even if the entire council is out there advocating for an issue, if you don't have an issue that's impacting a large portion of the public, it's going to be very hard to get something accomplished. So you want to make sure what you're tackling is something that really resonates with the public. And so that's also why we have this committee as well, because the public can attend, and they can also provide you additional input here about things that you're considering. Another thing to consider, does the council have the capacity to take on this issue? Last year was a fiscal only session, so it was a very short session. There were only a certain amount of bills that a legislator could bring. This year, that's not the case. They can bring, however many bills they want. It's not necessarily tied to a fiscal session or fiscal only sort of conversations. So we don't have to worry about a shortened fiscal session here. Is this broader than the council's scope and mission? Sometimes, and you'll probably see items on this community input that may not necessarily align with the council's mission. For instance, I don't remember if it was this year or if it was last year or something like that, but one of the inputs was they wanted to create a school specifically for children with autism. That is not something we would put on our agenda, because we were trying to be more inclusive, understand where that input came from. But so those are things you got to think about. Is it something that's going to be in line with what the council is responsible for doing? And is it something that is in line with our plan? If it's not tied to our plan, we can't really do much about it. That's why our plans are written pretty broad, just to let you know. Is there another group that could tackle this? We've done this in past years where, let's take housing and transportation for instance. That is a daunting task to try to figure out how to tackle that. But there are advocacy groups that have been out there trying to tackle it. There are advocacy groups that have created committees about housing and transportation. And so you have to think about, is this particular agenda item better suited for someone else? Or maybe it's something that, I think before we get to it, I think there's fines or something that someone will want to increase. We'll talk about it when we get there. There's probably a group that's better to do that than the council itself. Is this a controversial issue is something you also need to keep in mind. We do not really get involved in very controversial issues. I think I used this example last year. I'll use it again this year. There was a bill dealing with abortion a few sessions ago. It did not start out that way. It was amended that way, and then we stopped tracking it. Because it was, I can't remember what it started out as, but as soon as they started getting into that issue, we backed away. Again, whenever it comes to disability, you can tie any issue to the disability community, but there are certain issues that very hot topic political issues that we should not really get involved in. One that's not on here, if it is a bill, if you want to run a bill, you want to create legislation, this is not just a funding thing. You really need to keep in mind the capacity to do that with staff. Running one bill takes a lot of time and commitment, and nights and weekends and all that stuff. We did that this past session, a group of us, so we're gonna attest to that, lots of meetings, like there's a lot involved in running a bill. Whether we do it ourselves or we partner with people. So if you're trying to tackle things that would be creating multiple pieces of legislation, you have to consider, do we have the capacity to do that? And it's even more challenging because at this moment, as most of you do know, we are, or maybe I don't know, but we are down 2 program staff. We normally have 6 program staff. We only have 4. And so that's folks that would be involved in doing some of these things. You have to take that into consideration.
When you, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, I speak. When you said we down to program staff, what was that?
Both of our program monitors are gone. Yeah.
What you mean, like monitor what?
What's that?
What you mean, like when you saying monitor?
They monitor contracts. One of the monitors was over our partners in policymaking and our youth leadership forum, which are 2 big initiatives. The other monitor was over LaCan and Families Helping Families, which are another 2 of our big initiatives that we focus on in our plan.
So are we getting them back or we just down to them? We're not,
That's the hope.
we're
Yeah.
not getting them
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
Is it because of the board or is it just because of anything else?
Well, there've been obstacles one obstacle was there was a hiring freeze that the governor put in place. I think the hiring freeze was, can you guys help me? Was it until like July or something? Yeah, so after July, the LDH secretary put something in place where we have to get approval to advertise for positions, and we have to get approval to actually hire for those positions. So those are a couple of more obstacles, or I won't say obstacles. There are just a couple of more steps that we have to take in order to, number one, advertise on civil service for those positions. And then once we find someone that we want to hire, we have to get another approval to hire that person.
So is that something, I don't mean to cut you off, is that something we have to look at, or is that basically what y'all have to look at?
Yeah, as staff, we're taking care of that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I done ran my wheelchair the wrong way, I was just asking. Sorry, I'm afraid somebody, I was just curious.
That was a good question.
Yeah.
You don't
Thanks,
know if you
Eric.
don't ask, so that's fine.
Another thing, which is the final thing on that document, would be looking at, when you look at the list of possible issues that you're gonna wanna recommend to advocate for, are there too many? So generally, we pick a handful of issues, 3, maybe 4, that we focus on. Again, I think I share this in the planning meeting all the time. If you want to do everything, then you're not going to be great at something, right? And so that's kind of where you have to start juggling that thought in your mind of how many things are we going to advocate for? What is not only the capacity of doing it, but is it going to overwhelm people? So when you run something, let's say a funding issue, a lot of times all those funding issues can be in one alert, right? But if you start looking at issues, like maybe we have something that's going in the transportation committee, and then maybe something in the education committee, and then maybe something in the funding. So you're looking at three alerts that might be going out back to back. And it can get very confusing at times when we try to combine them. It can get very confusing when we send multiple alerts or have yellow shirt days back to back. And sometimes when too much information comes out, which inevitably it happens at session, people stop doing things because it gets tiring.
Speak to me, please.
Yep.
So we don't have a limit of the limits we need to be at, like 2 or 3, or you just got it open right now? Can we just have it at 2 or 3, or we can't do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's up to what y'all want to recommend. Generally, so back in the day when we would go through legislative kickoff and it would go to the council, most of the time, it would be narrowed down to like 3 or 4 issues to be on the advocacy agenda.
But wouldn't that be better to have a cap on it where we don't have to get to where it's to a boring point, where if you got more than so many, where you're getting people to a point where they're getting bored, I'm just.
You certainly can.
If I'm not trying to I'm just asking questions because you don't want them to get to a point where they're getting bored. If you got so many, throw it out there and then they don't know where should I choose this or choose that, why we can't just go to a cap? Well, okay, we working with this. And another question, do this deal with the budget where we have to know what we picking, or is that don't have effect with it?
So for your first question, this committee can set a recommended limit. You can recommend to the council that we only pick 3 issues, 4 issues, 10 issues. Well, Karen and Kristen probably remember that one year you couldn't come up with a smaller amount, so they recommended 9 issues, thinking the council would whittle it down, and the council voted all 9 issues to be advocated for. That was the COVID year, I think. So we ended up not advocating for all of that stuff because we didn't bring folks out for session, and it was a very different session anyway. But this committee would be, as staff, we can't tell you yay or nay on how much or how little you want to advocate for. But this committee can make that recommendation. And your other question was about the budget.
Yeah,
Whose budget? The state's budget or the council's budget?
the council budget. Do that have something to do with that once if we have so many, or no, that don't have to do?
No, our budget wouldn't impact what we're advocating for, because you've already funded the initiatives like such as LaCan and the leaders and stuff. That would be our advocacy leg. So that's already done. Now, I mean, there are factors at play if you want to look at budget, and if you advocate for too much, we might have to start lessening the amount of people that we can get to the
That's what I
Capitol.
was getting to, that we will have to come back to the table and look at something else if we get too many. That's what my concern.
Not necessarily, because I don't think I don't think the council's budget is anything you have to worry about as far as picking your agenda items, unless we're losing money. But I don't think you would have to come back, let's say, if we realize there's a lot going and we're constantly at the Capitol and we have ways and we have padding in our budget that we could get people to the Capitol and not really have to worry. I don't think you have to have that as something to consider when you're developing your agenda. Yeah, I think you're good budget wise.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
So we already talked about overwhelming, confusing, that watered down effort, right? If you're just going after so much stuff, whenever you go talk to legislators, you're just coming at them with so many things, that might cause them to lose interest or think that maybe they can't help you because you need so much or you want so much. And that's another factor that you need to look into if you're asking for funding for things. There's been years where we have asked for $20-30 million because we were addressing rates that year. I would not put a request where you're asking for $20-30 million and then another request where you're asking for 10 and another request where you're asking for 12, because that's not going to happen. If you're going to ask for a large funding request, That's probably gonna have to be your only funding request with the way this legislature is set up. They're very fiscally conservative, and so they're not looking to spend a whole lot of money. So those are things to factor in. At least that is just my recommendation. I'm sure there are people that might disagree with that approach. But I'm just letting you know from my experience, if you go in there asking for a lot of money, your visit with your legislator is not necessarily going to go that well. Or they might lose track of what you're asking for. Or maybe just give you a piece of something you're asking for, and not necessarily the whole thing. So those are just a few things to consider in that particular document, just to kind of set up stuff that you're going to start talking about, which is the community input, which is the big document. I will explain sort of that document to you, what it is. As I mentioned earlier, we have community input meetings that our LaCan leaders, with support from our Families Helping Family Centers, host each year. I can't remember how long ago, it's been a few years now, but the council wanted some sort of community input type meetings to develop, to get input or solicit input from the public about what should go on the advocacy agenda. So every region, there are 10 regions, but we have 9 leaders and Families Helping Family Centers. They're gonna have at least 2 meetings in each region. I believe there was also like a multi-region sort of statewide meeting as well that they did that folks could participate in. Some were virtual, some were in person. So it really made it accommodating for the public to attend. And these are all the ideas that were brought to the table. Some of them might look a little bit different, at least for our leaders and Families Helping Families directors that are in the room or participating online. Because you may have multiple regions that are kind of saying the same thing or saying very similar things, and so that information might be combined. In this document, if it is highlighted in green, that was considered a priority. There's also a priority column all the way on the right. If it has a check mark, that was considered a priority. So I mentioned there are 9 regions. Or 9 leaders and Families Helping Family Centers. Whenever they get this document to rate this community input, they can either do it jointly as a regional effort, or they could do it individually. So we received 11 forms back that rated this information. So we probably had a region that was a leader and a director did their own thing, and everyone else kind of joined forces. So what we did and what we've been doing for years is pretty much anything that is above the halfway mark is what we show you is listed as a priority. So if 6 or more, in this case, 6 or more of those forms rated one of these issues as a priority, we put a check mark there and we highlighted it in green for you. Just saying there were a majority of our regions that said this is something that you should really consider as something on your agenda. We also added an additional column for you this year that we didn't have in previous years, and that is the number of regions that report this issue. So we can kind of give you an idea of, is this only an issue that's being focused on in one area of the state, or is this in multiple areas of the state? And then we also have the typical statewide issue if our leaders and directors felt like this is something that is impacting the entire state. And then also, is there a legislative fix? Meaning, is this something that we could tackle at the Capitol building during that session from March 9th to June 1st? We've also sort of tried to separate this document into particular issues. So you're going to have the big issues, home and community-based issues, transportation, housing, education, employment. And then you might see that some of those issues are kind of broken up within those areas. I will say, whenever you get to things like home and community-based services, it's very complicated. There's so much overlap. So if you read something and it's listed under Medicaid and you're like, oh, it should be under this issue, that's not as important. It was just us trying to figure out a way to break it up for you to kind of sort of see things in a smaller section instead of just looking at a long list of all these particular issues. when you look at each row, you're gonna have a bolded section. So if you look at that first one, protect Medicaid funding for SNAP benefits, that is just kind of a snapshot of what the particular issue is. If we had additional information, that's what is not bolded right below it, which is just kind of a little bit page one. Flip it back over. So if it is not bolded, that is just kind of a very short sentence explaining sort of maybe a little bit of context or maybe the intent. Some regions submitted paragraphs worth of information for each one. It would be a very long document. That's why we ask our leaders. That's why we ask our directors. And Keisha also has information that she could pull up probably if there's additional information out there. But generally, if you have questions about a specific block of information, that's where we can kind of default to any leaders or directors that are on, if they happen to have more context, or if any of our state agency folks maybe have some more context about that particular issue. So any questions about this document before you get into your discussions? Just does it kind of make sense? Looking at it, do you kind of understand the flow of it now?
When you say, Madam Chair, may I speak?
Yes.
When you say, home and base and Medicaid, I forgot my thought, what I wanted to say. Is that something that the board is basically looking at, or is that making any sense to you?
Yeah, so the title of each section doesn't really matter that much. It's mostly just a way of us trying to sort of organize the input we receive. So when you look at something that says that big title in bold right there, home and community-based services, everything that falls under that is going to be considered a home and community-based services sort of issue. And then you'll have where it has that grayed outline that has a little title, Medicaid healthcare access. That is just a section.
But when you say that, yeah, I don't mean to cut you off,
No,
Brandon,
it's
I'm
fine.
sorry. When you say that part, what you mean, like housing, is you saying like,
Yeah, so when you go through the document, you'll see like housing is one of them. Once you get through the home and community-based stuff, there's a section for transportation, there's a section for housing. And I think it'll make more sense when y'all work through the document, because the recommendation that we have is pretty much for you to just go section by section,
okay, I got you.
to be able to ask your questions, to be able to understand what was provided, as opposed to kind of bouncing around the document, because it's gonna get sort of confusing. So for instance, like I think you will look at under home and community-based services, they have that Medicaid healthcare access. It does go into the next page, but I would look at just that section right now. We're not talking about any other section, just those, however many rows there are under that particular section, going through those and having discussions about those. That's where the bulk of your work is today, is getting more information about all of these issues, for you to decide what you think is going to be more important to go on your advocacy agenda. Because I think what's going to happen is we'll keep an idea of the issues that you think are going to be most important that you might want to consider. And then we can pull those up towards the end when you're looking at making your recommendation, so y'all can figure out sort of what issues you think should be on that recommendation, and just do your motion at the end as opposed to motioning for each individual one. If you can come up with sort of a consensus of things that you would want, and then do that final motion.
Gotcha.
Question. So, say on page 2, the 3 things that are highlighted in green, the first 2, recurring funding for balance on families, continued funding for waiver services. These are things that we, of course, we're going to want all the time and every year, and we should be advocating for. In your experience, Brendan, and you've been doing this for a while, like looking at those 2 things in this environment, like, do you have any thoughts or recommendation on like how much else we should be taking on in addition to those, like advocating for those things. Like if we actually wanted to have Brian find a legislator to introduce a bill and actually make a policy change, like how much is it reasonable to take on in addition to that? Because I know last year we kind of focused on advocating for things like this because we're concerned about cuts coming through, and we didn't, fortunately, that wasn't a problem. But some people wanted us to be a little more aggressive in the agenda last year. So like just looking for general thoughts on, focusing on these things we probably should always be focusing on. And-
Well, one thing I can say is I would recommend that you not seek the Families Helping Families funding this year because we received word that our budget request was approved.
Okay.
So the full funding for our FHF centers was included in the budget that'll go to DOA and the governor. So I would not put that on the agenda. Now, certainly, if it gets pulled out at any point, then we'd advocate to get it back. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I think the leaders, directors, staff, a lot of council members, we've sort of laid down the case for Families Helping Families for many years. And so, every year we're not asking for more. It's simply just keeping that same budget. So I'm happy we at least had that this year. As far as continued funding for waiver services, cuts, as of right now, I don't know of any cuts per se. There hasn't been a discussion like there was last year. We had LDH go to the table and talk about, I can't remember how many millions of dollars that would have possibly been. I think it was 100 that was going to be taken out of that budget. We don't have any of that right now. So I think one of those things, whenever it comes to something like that, as far as cuts, I think that's sort of something that we would tackle if it happens. I know we have the discussion of over the next 10 years, there's going to be big cuts to Medicaid at the federal level. I have no idea what that means. I could defer to Brian. I don't know if they yet know what that means. I would anticipate some of those discussions are going to happen this session. And so that might be something that comes up where we have to add that into our conversation of what we're advocating for. But the big thing when you're looking at those or what kind of dollar figure we would have. That was kind of our argument last year, that $100 million was a lot of money, it was a lot of cuts, and we needed the most energy towards that particular issue, because that could have been very detrimental. There have been years though, so let's say right now we know that there's not been anything out that says cuts are happening. We've had sessions though where session starts and we realize there's a massive cut that's coming down the pipeline. Maybe there's a fiscal cliff or something. And we've abandoned our agenda that we had and we just took up that one issue. So that is also something that does happen from time to time. Hate when that happens because you put all this work into one thing and then you got to switch gears, but that's the way it works. But yeah, I don't know that right now we have to be full force in trying to protect waivers and services, and we don't have any information yet. And then I'll defer to my agency folks that says that we need to be concerned, but I don't know. Brian, Aaron, I'm not sure if y'all have anything to add to that.
I can say that as part of the fiscal year 27 request that we just put through, we did not include any cuts to our home and community-based services. And there were a few items that we put in to increase funding in certain areas. I'm trying to get a list of those right now. So if I can get those, I'll share those.
Gotcha.
You recognize. Thank you, Sadora. I think on this one, I think it's a little bit more than just waiver services and no cuts across the board. I think what was intended for that to mean was that, they do the priority level and all of that, people get services like that, but we're still having people that are not really getting the access to the services that they need because you have to start out at one waiver. You have to go be on it for so many days until they decide it doesn't work for you. And then, you can bump up, but you still have to go in the order in which the tiers go. And that, we still don't have enough IFS dollars to cover those extra hours for PCA, for respite, for things that go through IFS. And I think that's what people are talking, because now, even to get into the arts, you have to have a supports waiver. If you're a zero and you're just getting out of school, that's hard because, well, the need would be there because you're graduating and stuff. But to move up, it's difficult. We don't have enough son assessors in the state to be able to do, and doing it on a phone for an hour, is not adequately seeing the whole picture for families. I think that's more what was meant there. It's instead of just blatant across the board, save the cut, don't make any cuts.
I will say there are other things added in here that pull pieces from what you just said.
Mhm.
So I think there are some standalone issues, like I know the one you mentioned about the sun issues, the screening for urgency of need. I think there's some of that spelled out in here.
Yeah. I've read them.
And you might also see that where some of these issues might be duplicates, to some extent, might be worded a little bit different. But so that's something to consider. But what I would recommend though is going from the top, looking at your Medicaid healthcare access issues first. And getting clarity on any of those issues. Now, none of them are in green, none of them were listed as a priority. But there are some in there that were listed as being statewide issues, having a legislative fix. Now you will see a majority of them, only one region reported that issue, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not impacting multiple regions, especially if folks are saying it's a statewide issue, then it must impact other regions. It just only came up in one particular region. So any questions, clarity y'all need around Medicaid, healthcare access, any of those particular issues? I guess we'll give you a minute. We'll pause for a minute so you can look over that section. I guess that makes the most sense.
I have a question for the Medicaid. Person, you said right now is, Madam Chairman.
Yep.
You said right now is no cuts, correct? That's on the table, right?
So yes, in our state budget, there have been no cuts included in the fiscal year 27 budget request. So that's the budget that would start next July 1st of next year.
So is y'all to a point where y'all, and if it's not contained to the meeting, y'all just tell me and I respect that. But is y'all still at the point of getting people to sign up and know what's going on and how things are going on with you guys?
Could you tell me a little bit more about that? When you say
Like-
sign up for what?
Medicaid is still signing people up to programs, and I'ma just use me. And I get a lot of phone calls saying Medicaid is saying, come sign up, come do this, come do that. And I know directly as Medicaid, y'all don't do phone calls, and well, I can't speak. Do y'all physically do phone calls? Is that prank, is y'all still putting, how do y'all put y'all information out to the people that we physically know that that's Medicaid and not getting fraud or beat up?
So, and there's a few different areas. So as far as eligibility, that's just maintaining your Medicaid card or your coverage every year. They typically send all of that through the mail, but you could get a phone call about your Medicaid eligibility. Aside from that, if you're on a waiver, your support coordinator or your case manager is going to call you. Or any of your, if you have in-home services, your provider might call you. If they need to send another worker out or something, but I can't think of any other reason why you would be getting a call from Medicaid other than those reasons.
Cause I'm not trying to hold y'all meeting, because I get a lot of calls hey, this meeting here, come to this place, come do this, come do that. And I do have a support worker, but I be freaked out when I get all these calls, like, wait a minute. Hold up, something ain't right. And speaking for the elder people, they don't know, and they'll just pull things out. And me, I just press the click button. If it's red, I press that button, because it's red to me, that, you know, I know it's off, cut you off. But they don't know, so that's my concern, that's why I was.
If you ever, if anything's ever unsure, I would check with your support coordinator.
Okay.
And they could probably tell you, yes, this is connected to the Medicaid program and you need to respond to it, or no, don't worry about that. That's
Thank
because
you.
we usually, when we issue letters or forms, there'll be a number to call on there or an ID on it so that if you call, you can verify that it did come from the state.
Okay, if you have a few minutes after we go on our break, can I speak to you?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
I just want to share my experience. I feel like whenever Medicaid or Medicare is reaching out, I not only get a letter in the mail, but I usually get an email too. They try to contact me in multiple ways, and that's kind of how I differentiate between, is it fraud, or is it something that I really need to respond to or answer? Which kind of helps me, because sometimes I get the text messages too, and I'm like, this looks fishy. I don't think this is.
Right, because it's spam call,
Mhm.
and then the email, Lord Jesus, if you get me through email, that's 100 for me. You get me through email, but.
And I always click the email, because sometimes it'll say Medicaid, and then when you click on it, it'll be some sort of crazy email address that's
Yeah.
disguised.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
So now it's just our time to discuss it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We were just giving folks a chance to look over it. And now would be the
Any
time.
questions or need any clarity on any of the first stuff, like the Medicaid healthcare access?
Yeah, and it does spill over into page 2, just before the first green block there.
Can I offer some information about one of the items?
Sure.
So on page 2, for the item that is improved therapy access through waiver programs by increasing Medicaid reimbursement for therapy providers to align with market rates. I do just want to let everybody know that it's been mentioned several times over the past year. I think Julie's talked about it some. The rate study that we've been working on, that those therapies were included as part of the study. And that's currently with our secretary right now under review. They're discussing it. So I just wanted to let everybody know that those waiver therapy services were also included as part of the rate study.
Good to know.
I was also curious, I had a note about that one of if a rate was only the issue. Based on the information here, I don't know, like, is this more of a challenge in a rural area? Like, what was that region that reported it? Is it more of a rural area? Is it more of an urban area? Because we've had this discussion before, because there's always usually a comment of we need more specialists in rural areas, and you can give someone a higher rate to serve that community, but if they don't feel like they're getting other things that are not necessarily tied to caring for an individual, such as a place that they would want to stay or amenities that they would want in their personal life out in their community, they might not go to those areas. And so I'm just curious if how much of an impact that has on any access to some of these services. Is there a rural versus urban kind of battle between those things? Do we know if the rate study looked at any of that? Like if there was any sort of discrepancies in areas?
I can't recall if they looked at developing separate rates for the different geographic areas of
Yeah.
the state. I don't believe so, but I could find that out. And I can't get my computer to work, so I can look it up.
I'm not sure if that might have been one of my issues that I put in for community input, which I hate to talk about the ones that I put in, but I can share
That's all
my
right. You can
experience.
share your,
Because I don't think Lafayette is considered rural.
yeah, not Lafayette Parish. Yeah.
So we have no one providing aquatic, music, hippo, horseback.
Okay.
We have no provider for any of those anywhere in driving distance, because I have free time. So I would even drive 30 minutes to take shock, but we don't have anyone providing them. And the feedback that I've received in our community, specifically from hippotherapy, is she was providing it. And this is what she shared. It could be totally inaccurate, but she was providing it. She wasn't reimbursed. Maybe she didn't file the paperwork correctly. I don't know what it was, but she wasn't reimbursed. And so she stopped providing it because it was too much of a headache. The paperwork, that she could never get it accurate or in a way that she was being reimbursed. And so she felt like the system for her to, I guess, whatever paperwork she needed to do to get reimbursed was more work, time consuming than she could manage without
Yeah.
hiring somebody else to do that specifically.
Gotcha.
And I think the same for, because we have a music therapist in town too, and same for her, she's concerned with, well, how am I gonna manage the paperwork? If I accept it, am I gonna come out in the negative because of the system of
Yeah.
reimbursement or whatever I'm not sure what they have to do as providers. It's kind of the feedback that I've received.
And we had discussion about this, I think in self-determination years ago. I want to say there was a licensing issue is what, like just to have to go through to get the licensing to do it.
Mhm.
And
She might
that
have
was
mentioned
a-
that as well, that
That was a barrier for a lot of folks.
But then the reimbursement rate, I think, was a barrier to.
Right.
that too.
Like you have to go through all of that, but then the reimbursement rate was very low.
Yeah, I think it was a multi-factor
Yeah.
sort of
Right.
blockade, too many.
And I will say that's one thing for this committee to consider when you look at, because there's a few issues in here where it talks about rates. We signed on, with other groups working with the department to try to get this rate study in place using the ARPA dollars or funds that they had to get this rate study. It was gonna be on the agenda, the legislative agenda, because we were thinking we'd go through legislatively to require that. And fortunately, the department was willing to get it done because they recognized the need for that study. And so I would say we need that information because I do think the council should follow through with that particular agenda item from days past. Once we have an idea of what that rate is supposed to, or what the rates are supposed to be, what has come out from that study. I don't know if do we have an update, a timeframe of when that should come out?
I do not. I will check on that though. So what I can say is that I know our executive team has met with our secretary. I think he has a few follow-up questions that they were looking into, and then they just have to schedule that second follow-up meeting with him, I think, before they plan to release it.
Gotcha.
But I'll put that as a follow-up item to check on. They have an estimated time to get that released to everybody.
In the one line, I didn't know if you
Oh.
wanted public comment.
Yes.
Oh, she just put her hand down, but it was Melinda Elliott. I'm not sure if she still wants to speak. I can unmute her if you'd like.
Melinda, would you still like to speak?
Brenton covered my question. I was curious if I had missed a copy of the study to be able to read. It takes me a while to read things and understand things, but I understand it's in the works. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda.
Perfect. Yeah, I do know they were trying to put it in a package that was a little more plain language, I guess, more something a little easier for folks to understand. But hopefully we'll get that soon. You know, it's kind of past August, which was that original time frame. But I would I would recommend that the council follow through with something dealing with that rate study. It's my understanding there are going to be rates that need to be increased. Question is how much? It's also my understanding it's going to be a lot of money, so it might actually be a multi-year approach. Do we know if the departments are willing to ask for the funding? Or put in their request funding for these rates?
I think that's what we're waiting to get confirmation from. I can't speak on behalf of our leadership, and I don't know where they're going with that, but I will check on that. It's hard for me to make a commitment on behalf of the department, but
I see the secretary is always on the go. We need to get Bruce on the go over here. And maybe he can give us some information.
I have a question. Sure. Were you
Yeah,
done?
go ahead.
Okay, well, Brian, it's gonna be to you or Aaron. So I know that you said that y'all asked for increases in the budget that you submitted for FY 27. Have you found out what those increases were, and are any of them tied to any of the rates?
so the one that comes to mind, and I'm asking people to send me, but I haven't gotten it yet. One thing that was discussed during last session was for the work that support coordinators do. In the past, we have not been able to reimburse them for the work that's done on the very front end when somebody gets a waiver. So that initial plan of care meeting with them, because Medicaid prohibits us from paying out any funds to providers until they're certified in the waiver. And technically, someone's not certified until their level of care assessment's done and their plan of care is completed. So we found a way to allow us to pay them kind of an enhanced rate for that very first month that would cover that additional work that they have to do on the front end for that first plan of care and everything. So we're working to get that set up right now. We are hoping to start that, I believe, in January. If we can get everything in place, but we did include that as a budget item so that we would have funding for that in our budget going forward. Because right now, for the 6 months that it would be in place this year, we're just having to identify funds to fund that.
Okay.
Any other questions about any of these particular items? Okay, do we want to move on to a different section?
Yeah.
Lively bunch today. So next would be your community family support system. This one you've got, not too many issues that are listed specifically under this one. It starts on page 2, starting with those green blocks, and does go into the first view on page 3. We already covered the families helping families piece. We talked a little bit about the waiver services and cuts that Kristen shared about. The other one was the direct support worker pay raises was another issue. I don't know if I wanted to take a minute to read through the rest and then we can discuss anything.
I have a question.
Sure.
The DSW pay raises. Did I misunderstand, or I thought that was like in the works with was there not a rate increase?
I
that
think
was
the-
supposed to trickle down to the support workers?
I don't know of anything that would trickle down to them. I know some years ago, the wage floor was increased from $7.25 to $9. But there's nothing that I know of that says part of the rate goes to, I think they just have to be paid at that wage floor.
So at the federal level, that's part of the access rule. That won't take effect, I think, until 2028 though. But that provision of the access rule will require providers to give, if it stays in place as it is right now, 80% of the full Medicaid rate will have to go to the worker in some form or fashion, in direct pay, benefits. I think the providers do have a little bit of flexibility, but the federal requirement is that 80% of the rate would have to go to the worker.
Madam Chair, I speak.
Yes.
You're saying 80% of that have to go to the workers. But I'm seeing that more companies is closing because they basically don't have an overhead. Are y'all looking at that, or are y'all seeing that part? If I'm making sense to you.
So so for a portion of the rate, that should be kept to cover those overhead costs. As the rate study that we did, that's something that they looked at, or what are the costs the providers are incurring right now? What do they need to be able to pay their staff? But then also what else does it cost to keep the agency operating? So I can say that was considered with the rate study also.
Okay, but let me word this right so you can understand what I'm saying. Is it that y'all trying to do it the way that y'all do the caseworkers, where you have 3 companies open where they spread the clients out? Are y'all trying to cut some companies down, or are y'all trying to spread it where?
Are you talking about like our in-home providers?
Yes.
So, I think we have well over 400 in-home providers in the state right now. And there's no limit on those. If we have an agency that wants to open up in the state, they do have to go through a facility need review process. And we have a committee at LDH that looks at those just to make sure that they meet all the minimum requirements and that a certain area of the state doesn't have too many providers. So an area has to demonstrate that there's a need. But I want to say that we have about, it's north of 400 plus providers in the city right now that just do in-home services.
What is the rate?
Oh, for in-home, it depends on what service it is. Like IFS. Could look that up. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's like 1852.
I thought it was 18, but I wasn't sure.
Cause we advocated to get the night rate to match the day rate, which was 1850.
And what do they do if the provider company is not doing their raise, even though they get the rate? Do y'all have something in place if they don't do their raise?
You mean what they pay their workers? Is that what?
Yeah.
So right now, just beyond that wage floor, that's all we have in place currently. It's just that wage floor.
And I think that's part of the discussion of was last year of getting the information that we need to increase those rates. And then you can start looking at adjusting that wage floor based on, because I want to say the rate study is also supposed to kind of give us an idea of what our workers should be paid. And so we would have that data and information that Milliman came up with to be able to take to the
Right,
legislature
but my
to
understanding,
justify the rate.
I'm sorry, Bert, go ahead. But my understanding is, even though they give the raise, my thing is, if the company do not spread the raise, what do they have in place to make sure that's being put out? And they're not being stuck at the 875 or the 725, and then my thing is, if, I'm not gonna hold y'all, if they getting 725 or 825, we don't get the full service that we need because they looking at, okay, I gotta do 3 clients, I gotta do 4 clients, I gotta do 5 clients. And the company is keeping what they giving to pay them, if I'm making sense. What they got in place for that.
So Aaron, are you able to answer that? Cause I know you guys were doing like audits of the companies.
Immediately after that floor was put in place, we did an audit of all the providers to see who was and who was not paying the $9 an hour. And that was turned over, I believe, to program integrity, but I can check on that.
We have a comment.
No, it's a question.
Oh,
I wanted
question.
to know, what is the educational requirement to have that position that John? It's a high school diploma.
And there's a hand raised. Melinda.
Okay, I'll have one question and then, I'll address her. So you're saying that it should eventually go to 80% will be federally required to go to the worker.
Yes.
And
If-
that rate's 1852, because if it's at 9, that's like only 50% is going to the worker.
Mhm.
So at what point will they federally be required to, in some capacity, be giving 80%? Do you know the year on that? I'm just curious.
I think you said it was
2028.
2028.
2028?
I'm gonna see if I can confirm that right now, but I believe it's 2020.
That's also assuming
It
it's
stays.
the access rule stays in
Yes.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some of, I
So
don't know
if
if
I
it
misquote
answers
y'all.
some of what you were
Just
talking
was
about,
curious.
Eric, if the rate increases, if you want to see more of that funding go to the worker until, let's say, the access rule goes into place, you would have to also at request of the department to increase that wage floor to make sure more of that rate is going to the worker. Because as of right now, if you do request, I don't know what the rate is supposed to go to. Let's just say it's $20 out of the 18. If you don't adjust that wage floor, then you have providers that have they don't have any requirement of paying workers more than $9 an hour. But you would have to adjust that wage floor. I also see under here, the direct support worker pay raises, they say it's a legislative fix. I would caution you about locking that into legislation, because then you can't you can't make any changes without going to the legislature. So let's say we increase rates this year because we had got, I don't know, $30 million. We bump that wage floor up to, let's say, $11 an hour. And you did that legislatively, but whenever we get a rate increase next year, then we have to go back and try to change that legislation. Whereas if you just do it through that administrative advocacy, that rule change that LDH can do, you can, because it's currently in rule, that wage floor. So doing it that way as opposed to legislation, because that could easily be changed easier than legislation, I guess.
And I also want to say, I think something that we're currently working on right now is amending our cost reports for providers to start capturing that information so that when it comes time to implement that federal requirement of ensuring that that percentage of the rate goes to the worker, we'll be able to track that on their cost reporting.
Melinda, do you have a question?
Good.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have somebody else that needs to go first?
Yes, ma'am, do you mind?
No, let her go ahead.
I don't mind. I don't mind at all.
Okay, you can go first.
Okay. I understand what everybody's saying about the technical stuff about this, but this is a big ticket issue in the communities with our families. Yeah, this is the life support of our families, and it keeps getting pushed off. We got to find out this rate methodology. We've got to do this. You know, we've been putting people with, which they're not wanting to accept that, whether, you know, however we dress it up. Then, you know, they were supposed to have public testimony and feedback, town hall meetings, you know, for this in August and September. And, you know, those have not happened. Community has not been able to put any input in. And I completely understand what y'all were saying about having to raise the floor and having to do this, but that's not what the communities are hearing. That's not what they're understanding. All they know is that, you know, they are approved for services. They don't have a worker. You know, they keep asking for pay raises. The state knows that it's happening, but y'all, we got to have a better answer for our people than, I mean, because if we were legislators, we'd have done been fired by now. I mean, but just because we have no, I'm out of a good response to give my families now, you know. People with nursing care, you know, they get hours, they can't fill them, they lose them. You know, people are still having to take off work to, you know, meet the needs of this. You know, we went into parents, caregivers, we've done, you know, we've kind of band-aided it to death. I mean, we, you know, unfortunately, our members, however you want to look at it, they're looking for better answers than, you know, we've got to wait. I mean, this is a major thing when we have to go back to the regions and give our feedback about what happened at this meeting, you know, and what we're going to pick it up. And when we start making calls to plan out these agenda items, well, why wasn't this on there? Why wasn't this on there? Y'all know this, we know, but something has to be done better. And I'm sorry, I don't know what the answer is because we're looking for answers ourselves, but I mean, the cost participation or the rate methodology and all that, I mean, we've been given that for several years now, and it's just, it's harder to swallow every year. And again, that's what we're telling them, and now we got to tell them they have to wait until 28 if it doesn't change before then.
Well,
so
I'm not saying we have to wait until 28, but that's when the federal government will require us to. We could take steps before then, especially, again, I can't. I apologize. I don't have the authority to speak on behalf of the department, but the rate study will be coming out and there will be recommendations released when that happens. And I'm going to go back and see if I can get an update on that when it's going to be released.
Do you think it's going to be this year?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, because it's my understanding it is
This
done.
calendar year, yeah.
It's finished.
Yes.
They're just trying to make it easier to understand. That's my understanding.
with no public input,
How can that happen?
Well, this is just going to be the results of the rate
Yeah.
study. We're not taking action yet. This will just be the results that we'll share with the public. But then I think there's also, kind of discussions going on as because it will be a large sum of money. Is this something that we can do all at once? Is it a step-by-step process that will have to happen over 2 or 3 budget cycles so that it's more realistic for us to get that money? I think that's some of the discussions that's being held right now too.
Just a tidbit that I remember from from the SAC meeting, I think it was mentioned that it was done, but it was so information dense that had they released it the way that it was, none of us would have, it would have been information overload. So they were trying to figure out a way to compose it in a way that would be easier for the public to digest before what I think I remember them saying too from the SAC meeting.
And additionally, once it is in a posture, they are going to re-engage the community groups that they used previously.
Melinda, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. So, in my mind, there are two closely related issues going on here that we keep mixing up. One of the issues is the provider rate, because the providers are saying that even now they're not getting a high enough a rate to pay all their expenses. And then the other issue is the 80% rule. And the fact that our DSWs, my daughter has a waiver, that our DSWs are having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to make a living, if not more. So, I'd like to be able to separate those two issues. I think it's wrong to tell the community, to tell the providers that it's not going to happen until 2028 because they're going to get slammed. And if that's just too long to wait. There needs to be something that happens in the next 3 years. And, we've been telling our DSWs and our families for years that we're working on being able to get their person that takes care of their loved one more money. And then, we keep, like one of the ladies before me said, we keep telling them, well, we're working on this, we're working on that, we're working on the other, but isn't it turning into anything for the people, at least at my house, that take care of Domino, that I trust to take care of Domino. But yeah, I'd like to separate those two issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda. Christina, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo what the ladies have been saying. That is one of our biggest issues, if not our biggest issue. And we keep going to families, telling them, we're gonna get it next year, we're gonna get the methodology, we're gonna be able to see, all these things, but we have not produced results for them, I believe, in 2 legislative cycles. And so our membership base gets very discouraged because we say we're gonna do these things and we are actively trying, but then on the other end, we're not getting the receptive information back. And so I believe that is where the disconnect is, that we need some sort of receptive information of a plan that we plan to implement. Because as Melinda mentioned, if we wait for this 80% rule to drop down to the access rule, our providers, because I was there the day that we met with the Providers Association and all the other different organizations from the ARC and a couple of others. If we were to raise the wage floor right now, they would be in debt. So how are we gonna implement this when the 80 rule comes down and they can't even pay over $9 an hour? So what if, like, hypothetically, it says that we should be paying them $18, $20 an hour? So I think it's fundamental that we start looking for ways to implement that plan rather than just waiting until 2028. And then we all get hit with this big, fiscal deficit that no one is ever gonna be able to meet adequately.
And to that point, I know I sound like a broken record with the rate study, but in the rate study, with the recommendations that will be coming out, there is a recommend for, they have the rate broken down. So with a portion of that rate recommended to go, that this is the amount that should be paid to the worker, and this should be the other portion of the rate that should go to the agency to cover the overhead that we talked about earlier. So that will also be addressed in the rate study with the recommendation for the rate changes.
I'll say, at least from your staff perspective, the study is what we need. The information is there to be able to show whoever we need to show, legislature, but also any stakeholders, any providers, any advocates of the information will be built into that study that we can use to our advantage to make these requests. I think, I know, I understand the concept of separating the two, but I also think you're gonna get a better response if you tie the rate increase with the wage floor than if you just try to do one or the other. Or if you just try to go for an increase in the wage floor without an increase in the, I think if the study is gonna be able to give us the information we need to tie them together, you would probably have more success in what you're advocating for, than if you try to do it at two separate times. It's my thought. As the staff that writes your fact sheets and things. If I don't have that rate study documentation, I can't make an argument for you for many millions of dollars to a legislature that is looking at not giving many millions of dollars this session. So I too am frustrated to not have the study yet.
How will this affect, I mean, I know waiver services are optional. So if we don't have the money to do these fundings, and we still don't have the workers and we still don't, where is that gonna put our whole situation in kibosh? I mean, we can't meet the need, we can't pay for it. So, I mean, we're not gonna be able to continue to offer, at least at the level,
It's my understanding we're still able to pay for it.
even with the raising the floor and everything.
Oh, maybe I misunderstood what you're trying to say. Are you saying?
Our services are optional.
Mhm.
So if we're not able to continue to be not able to meet people's needs and we don't have the money to fund at the rate that we need to, how is that gonna affect our waiver services as a whole?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. I mean, because the way I see it right now is without increasing rates or wage floors or anything like that, everything just continues status quo.
Okay, there's a hand raised.
Melinda, you're recognized.
Well, and myself and families that I work with find that whole concept of rate study disappointing. This has been 2 solid years, and we're still waiting for something, waiting for somebody to approve it or simplify it, to have meetings. Yeah, it's taking forever, and people don't want to work for $9 an hour, not if they can go to Walmart for $11 and work at a job that's less demanding. DSW work is complicated work. I had to do it myself for a little while during the pandemic, and I have lots and lots of new respect for DSWs. But yeah, the rate study's disappointing.
Thanks, Melinda.
just for clarity, it wasn't until the 2024 session that we started pushing information to try and get the rate study done. So it has not been 2 years. It has been over a year, but we have not hit the 2-year mark yet.
When did it start? Because I came in after it started, so I'm just curious as to when it.
We pushed out a fact sheet in February 2024. But I think, I don't recall exactly when we got word from the department that they would go ahead and just use those ARPA funds. It would have come after we put out that fact sheet though, I believe. But I think it was just before the 2024 session. Because we didn't have to go into session advocating for it. So,
And if I'm remembering correctly, I might have the date slightly off, but I think our contractor started meeting with stakeholders last fall. And then they actually started the formal work on the study in January of this year.
2025.
Yeah. And then that took about 6 months, I think.
Elliot has her hand raised.
yeah, we will hit the 2-year mark soon, at least for our advocacy purposes.
Melinda, you're recognized.
Okay, you guys, but the discussion started long before that. When Christina had gone to the meeting with the providers, that was part of the answer that we had then. And that was before the months that y'all are talking about that meeting happened. So this has been on the table, whether or not everybody got ready or moved everything into place. This has been the answer and what was on the table since before the months that y'all are talking about. It's been a long time.
Anything else under that community family support system that y'all have questions about, need clarity on? No? Okay, so next would be.
Son, screening of urgency. He's coming.
Okay. Yeah, next would be, screening for urgency of need, the sun screenings. There's a couple of issues listed under there.
This is
You recognize.
This is one of those things that we talked about earlier about the SUNS assessment. You know, our families are reporting, even ourselves that have SUNS assessments. There's not enough in the state. And again, they do it in an hour over the phone, Zoom. But that's the person that's making decisions for your child as far as what services they're going to get or what priority level that they get. And so, I know when we first started with the SUN scores, you know, we had so many per region and stuff like that, but it is no longer like that. And I know with the hiring freeze, that kind of didn't help the situation at all either, because, you know, we weren't able to replace those that left. But, it's backlogging waiver because the assessments are not done right. And so then they have to go and they have to fill out all this paperwork to do a bump to get them, you know, where they need to be or to be re-evaled, you know, that kind of stuff. So, that's the ongoing problem. Our families really feel that those need to be done in person, whether they come to the Human Service District or whether they come to their home. I mean, even our early steps is provided in the home because that's the least restrictive environment, you know, where it's comfortable for them. But they're just not getting the urgency or what is the true picture for a family really is for services. So.
I can attest to that. I think it's, the phone call is very informal, and when you're a parent and you're in survival mode and you're just trying to make it through the day, you have, at least my experience, I have a tendency to pick up the phone and say, no, I'm okay, we're doing okay, because to admit that you're not, you know, it was normal to me. What was not normal to anybody else was
Yeah.
very normal life to me. So until somebody sat me down and said, well, no, it's not normal that you still change your 6-year-old's diaper.
Yeah.
And he still, you know, is wetting the bed every single day and you have to spoon feed him. I was like, no, it's normal. I'm his mom. I got it.
And you know, they don't ask questions in people first language. So you don't really understand because you can say, oh, well, my child doesn't sleep. Okay, well, to me, my child doesn't sleep. But what actually happens is he literally does not sleep. I do not sleep because he doesn't. He's up and down all night. He's running around. He's like, you know, got his days and nights mixed up, you know, those kind of things. It's way more severe than my child doesn't sleep. And I think that's the point that families are trying to get across, that they don't get that in an hour, you know.
If somebody would have walked into my house and seen, they would have realized very early on, I was very much a mother in denial, trying to survive, it was not normal, right? So I don't know that, I see that we don't have a legislative fix for it, but I think it is an important topic for sure. And it took us 4 gun screenings before we ended up scoring a 3, having an urgency of need for a waiver. So it was a grueling process, my personal experience.
I do have a question. So I know anyone can request a face-to-face screening as opposed to a phone. Do we have an idea of the turnaround time, like it would take to request it and actually get, because obviously I would assume a phone screening, they could do more quickly than an in-person one, but is there a time frame of how long it takes?
I'm not sure. I can ask. But yes, you do have the ability to request an in-person.
Do our families know that is the question?
We've given training to our screeners to make sure that they are offering that as an option, and we'll reinforce that.
I think that would be helpful.
Region 4, they are telling. Yes. We've had waiver for about a year now, and we were told that from our last screening that we could have the option in person, but it would take a little bit longer. But we did have the option. But something that I did find to be an issue as well was that, at least when we first started applying, was we weren't, the first screening came so quickly from when I applied for Medicaid for him, when we got his formal diagnosis, that if you weren't utilizing your EPSDT, then you automatically were scored in a way that you didn't qualify for waiver. Even like your urgency for need was a 0 if you weren't using your EPSDT, but we hadn't. That was such a process in getting that established that they crossed over. Am I making sense? They like crossed over. So how could we be using that if we were still in the process of getting that program set up before we were? No, I'm not saying that we should delay the screening. I just think that should be taken into consideration. And we had a very smooth process through Medicaid. I have family members, I have friends, not family members, I have families that I'm in contact with on a regular basis who are having major issues being approved, or that theirs got kicked back and they had to reapply, and that could take a long time to finally get your EPSDT and find somebody and find a worker who's, you know, to be using that program. I don't know. That seems clunky to me, just my opinion. Christina, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just about the sun screening. My daughter's sun screening was 1 hour over the phone. And while she did, of course, get a higher score because she's severe and profound, for someone who may not be as severely profound as her, if you're not looking at that child, that's like if I say I'm a teacher, but I'm never in the room with any kids. You know what I mean? How am I supposed to make a valid observation on whether or not, and that could swing for both sides. I'll use it two-way. A parent can lie or a provider can lie. We'll just put it out there like that. So if I, as the person who is doing the sunscreen, if I cannot see the home, if I cannot see the child, if I cannot see the family, how can I make an accurate observation of whether or not this person is actually receiving an accurate score on their sunscreening? And so I agree that it should not be done. I mean, some people are getting them on Zoom. That's amazing because at least you have some viewing. But I literally got a phone call and I could have said anything, you know, or vice versa. So it's something to consider, for sure.
I think she answered one of the questions I had was when y'all say phone, do you mean actual phone or is it a virtual? So there's 3 ways you can request to have it done, virtual, in person, or by phone. And I know, Aaron, y'all talked about, y'all do quality control checks, right, for the virtual options?
Yeah, we do. We record all of the Zoom sun screenings and we have spoken about the possibility of also recording the phone and in person in order to be able to go back and review what each of the screenings is like. And then we can offer screeners additional training or assistance by watching the videos. And then also somebody higher up can review that and check to make sure that screening was done correctly, if the score is correct, et cetera.
Certainly doesn't hurt.
Just from a parent perspective, I would have loved if mine was recorded also, because I would have liked to have had a copy of it, just so that I could go back and replay it for myself. Because I had questions, because it's such an intense, for me, it was such an intense, high emotional experience that I would have loved to have a copy of it.
And that's new. That's been within, I believe, the last year.
It was right after I had done it, and I was like, man, I wish I had a recording.
So right now, it's just the virtual, though. We are looking into the option of recording the phone.
Yep.
The in-person. Question, I forgot it. Any other Sun questions, concerns, clarity that you need? Okay, next up, there's a couple of them under FSI, the supplemental security income. I don't know if anyone has questions there.
Is anybody from SSI here? Excuse me, Madam Chair. Is anybody here from SSI?
No, nobody here from
My
SSI.
concern with that, I would like to see can we get somebody from SSI to come speak, I'm just throwing it out there, come speak and give some information that we get the clarity, because I feel like we don't get the true clarity, and there's a lot of stuff that's rolled out there from hearsay and they say, and I think we need some clarity on that. Is there any way we can do that, where we get somebody to come and speak, where we can get some clarity?
I think we can look into it. I think we would just need to know what exactly we need them to discuss.
I mean, income, jobs that, you know, what's the limit of jobs? What's the limit of, you know, doing things that you can do? What is the, you know, it's a lot of hearsay out there for SSI, you know what I'm kind of saying?
So there are work incentive, I don't, they're called CWICs. What does CWIC stand for? Certified Work Incentive Planners. We have one on staff at LRS. And then also there are 2 contracts throughout the state. So I'm sure we can get somebody, to come and talk. Sure.
Yeah, because then we'll know what's the in and outs, because we hear he say, they say.
It's
and-
just, it's very specific. That's why you usually see one of these people individually, because they can tell you individually how your benefits are impacted, because there's so much to it.
I understand what you're saying. I understand.
I put this one down because this is for my issue. I know that this is a federal issue because it is Social Security and stuff, but
Which one are you talking about specifically?
the asset limits
Okay.
and stuff like that, I mean, it hasn't been raised, it's been capped at 2,000 for forever. I mean, it needs to be raised. I mean, you know, even for financial safety and stuff, you know, you're supposed to have at least so many months of, you know, to be able to pay your bills put back. Our families can barely pay their bills for that month, considering, you know, they can't have more than this, you can't work more than this, but yet the cost of living is going up. The SNAP benefits are going down, you know, you've got to find a way to replace those services in your life. So I don't know where we start with that. I know it's not I don't know if it's a legislative fix or not, but I mean, we got to start somewhere with, I mean, I guess.
Federally.
I was fixing to say, I guess we have to go to the federal legislators.
You can't own a car, you can't buy a dog. Yeah. It's,
No family.
you know, get a raise, your food stamps go down, you know. We need that.
Any other comments, questions?
And I just want to say, to echo what Eric was saying, although I know that Social Security is a case by case basis, I feel like there needs to be some type of general information, especially for self advocates, because let's be honest, most of that case by case is when someone is a caregiver or under, you know, guardianship. And so for our self advocates, a lot of them don't know how much money they can make. They, you know, before they get cut off, and then they get these huge overpayment letters. I just had a family I was talking with the other day. The brother of the person I was talking to, he lives on his own in a condo. His condo is paid for through his parents' trust. They put all of that together for him. And yes, I do have information to speak on their story, just for a clarifier. But they just got a letter in the mail the other day that they owe $33,000 now to Social Security. And so they have no idea where they went wrong. Because even though he is under a guardianship, he lives on his own, you know, everything is paid for that way. So I think while some of those things, of course, are by case basis, there needs to be some type of clarifier specifically for our self advocates around what their limitations are, what they can and cannot own, if someone is their custodian or if they're under a guardianship. Those type of things are very much like, I'm pretty sure you could ask somebody at Social Security if you can get them on the phone. You know, so there's all types of barriers that even if that information is available to them, that they can't often access it because no one at Social Security is available, we'll say, to answer those questions. So I believe if there was some type of maybe fact sheet, there may be, I'm not sure because I haven't really looked into it, but if there was some type of fact sheet or rat card or something for self advocates to explain to them more specifically about what the guidelines and limitations are on their Social Security benefits, I believe that as a starting point would be a tremendous benefit help.
I don't know if there are any
I haven't seen it.
FHF directors on the call, but I know y'all frequently, you know, before each new year starts, think of trainings and stuff. And I'm just wondering if anyone has any trainings that they do specific to SSI and things of that nature. I mean, that sounds like something that would be very beneficial.
We do.
Yes, do it.
Yeah.
We do.
Okay.
We do Medicaid updates. We do SSI updates, you know, and that's as they come,
Right.
you know, so. You would
He's not gonna tackle this kind of case though. This is specific to the individual.
No, but the general idea of like a fact sheet, just of having
Right.
basic general information, if that's accomplished through training. So I was just wondering if that was done throughout the regions. That's good. Any other, on the SSI front? No? So you've got 5 minutes before we break for lunch. We could dive into the protection and rights. You can also hold it until after lunch if you want. Or we could just start and go for 5 more minutes and that's where we stop.
Let's hope.
Let's go for 5 more.
Okay, perfect. So take a look at we're now under protection and rights. That's on page 3, starts with the green boxes there and it goes into page 4. Let's say one of the items here, the Medicaid waiver coverage for monitoring devices. I don't know, Brian, if you know what that would look like as far as seeing if
So-
that can be covered, or Aaron, anyone?
It would
Speak to that.
depend, and Aaron, I don't know if y'all looked at this, but it would depend on if you just wanted to make that benefit available to waiver participants or everybody in Medicaid, because the price tag would be a lot more if it was, and we call that, if it's not just in our waiver, if it's available to everybody, we call that a state plan service. So anybody in Medicaid can access it if there's a need for it. This probably, I mean, it does say waiver coverage. So it would just be probably amending one of our current service definitions to be able to pay for these types of things, or to add this as a service in one or more of the OCD waivers.
Gotcha.
Christina.
This is my item. So I did later find out after this that if you are on a waiver that you can request a medical device or tracking device. So just fun fact for anybody who needs it, because I was unaware also before. But I believe that it would benefit if we could open it up to all Medicaid recipients who qualify, obviously. Because not everyone has a waiver and some may be in a tedious waiver process. And those fundamental moments are critical, as we've learned, you know, over the last few months when a child elopes. And so if we could open that up to all Medicaid recipients, of course, with qualifiers, I believe that that would better suit what I was trying to say versus just for waiver recipients.
I think it's important to know too, that everybody who's on waiver is not gonna need one either, you know, like. It's pretty specific to a specific kind of child, you know?
Our IFS pays for monitors if they don't have a waiver slot yet, or that's part of what they use the flexible family funds for. There's a hand raised, Adrian Burns.
Hey, Adrian, you recognized?
Hi. Yes, my son is a really bad elopement risk. We don't have a waiver yet, but we have handicapped parking because of, I guess, it's listed as mobility issues, because he'll literally drag me into the street because he wants to run. He's a really big elopement risk. Would that, if you have like the ID with the mobility ID, would that qualify for Medicaid coverage? Is that something that that could be like one of the things you have to meet if you needed, because I'm terrified that he is going to elope and actually get out because we live right across from the river, and more than once he's made it to River Road as we're there, and we like it is something where that kind of thing would really help put us at ease rather than just like constant vigilance. Sorry. I don't know if that's clear or not. I was just wondering if because of if we have that ID, the mobility that he got at the DMV, if that would be considered reason for it to be covered. Sorry.
They don't really have any guidelines for that. Are you deemed eligible with OCDD or your Human Service District?
We just haven't, I guess we haven't, I started to put in, my son's autistic and my daughter is as well. We had a lot of lead in the house with and we were waiting for the lead hazard mitigation grant to go through, but it didn't. I don't know, I'm not sure if I don't think I've applied, or I thought I did, but I'm not certain. Sorry. It's a lot of, I get confused a lot with.
What region do you live in?
Jefferson.
I'll get with you, Adrian, when I get home and we'll get it situated, okay?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I was gonna say that, Adrian, when we break for lunch, I can text you and probably help you figure out exactly who you need to talk to.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I can't mute myself.
Any other questions under the protection and rights? Tori?
So that's putting Brian on spot. Brian, so you said at least some of the stuff can be done with the definitional things that you make internally. Is that something that just can be done unilaterally within the state, or is it something you'd have to apply to CMS for or something like that?
I mean, it depends on what it is. So with certain waiver services, we can just do an amendment with CMS to alter the service definition, to make it broader, to make it more restrictive. I think that's at our choice, but depending on the type of change that's made, that may or may not have a budget impact also. So it really comes down to what we're wanting to do and what type of tweaks we're wanting to make.
So if there's a budget impact, is that what it triggers CMS to approve, or is there a clear line for when like you need to go to CMS or you need to do something internally?
So our current waiver applications for each of the services that we have authorized under the waivers, we have to define what that service covers, who's able to provide the service, are there any limits to the service? So if we want to change any of those details, we would have to go to CMS to do it, have an amendment approved. Yeah.
I think the first one that we kind of hopped over is incredibly important, and there's 6 regions who reported the issue.
We want our own alert system.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are
Sorry,
Oh,
Christina.
Super important. I know that we had a statewide meeting and we also had our separate regional meetings that came up in depth during our statewide meeting. You know, Elena, you were there. Like everywhere else, specifically in New Orleans East, there's a lot of lagoons, waterways. We live right by the Mississippi River, all the things. And I think to some capacity, every region has those barriers. And so the Amber Alert, there's 4 states that already have something similar in place. So there's models already. I've done a little bit of the legwork. I can go deeper in that if you decide to choose it as an agenda item. But I believe that it's something that's very important because it keeps happening, not only in our state, but also nationwide. The number of children who have wandered and died from elopement has, I believe, quadrupled since 2020. So it's definitely something to consider as high priority.
More than kids, adults too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I say kids, but I mean individuals, all of them.
Tori?
So to clarify, we'd be looking at advocating for not something that kind of tacks onto the existing Amber Alert system, but a brand new system, a dedicated system for this purpose.
Or they could do us our own color. I mean,
Yeah,
we're not opposed to any of that. But they usually, everything is the elderly and the disabled. I mean, they group everybody together, and we would have no money tied to it.
So I will say in Louisiana, there is an alert for adults that have a developmental disability, and it is the silver alert. I think people always assume it's just for elderly, but it does encompass adults that have intellectual and developmental disabilities. There are a handful of states, just in some research, that do some other things, like for instance, Mississippi, we always like to look at people nearby. They have a purple alert, and it is not a standalone alert. Their alert gets tied to their amber and silver alerts. So if a child goes missing, there's an amber alert that's put out for whatever the reason, and then you attach a purple alert to it. I'm really simplifying it, but that's also added to it to basically say this child has an intellectual or developmental disability. Connecticut has its own standalone alert. Maryland, Florida, and Kansas, they have a purple alert, but it's strictly for 18 years old and older. I didn't see that they had anything specifically for children. Arizona kind of does a combination. They combine their amber alerts and their silver alerts and their purple alerts. Not the amber alerts, excuse me, their silver and purple alerts. And it's a safe alert. It's just something different. Texas has a whole bunch of alerts. Everything has its own alert in Texas. Theirs is called the Endangered Missing Persons Alert that is specifically for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So there are states you could look at that have standalone alerts. There are states that I kind of like and think it would be a little more simple if you sort of do something like Mississippi, where you have something that is attached to existing alerts that are already there. But I guess that when you really get into those sorts of details, that's when it starts really getting hashed out, when you're trying to write the legislation, and whenever it goes, whichever committee it would go to, whenever you get to that committee staff, that's when they start telling you kind of what you can and can't do, what's feasible. We saw that with our education legislation that we tried to run last year. Once it, you have an idea what it's going to be, and then once it gets before that committee staff, those are the attorneys, which we are not. Those are the people that are able to kind of tell you what you can and can't do based on what statute is there, what needs to change. So there are states that have something that you can look at modeling off of. You would just have to have a legislator that would be willing to run something like this for you.
Christina?
I have the legislator that's willing to run it.
I think they have to file their bills in January, I think is the date. Somewhere in there. Don't hold me to it, but.
I mean, it's got broad support from the community. It seems like something we could work on. It's probably something that's also, this is something I'm always concerned about, is asking for things that cost a lot of money, and this might not cost a lot.
It's about $75,000.
Exactly. So this could be something reasonable, as Brent was pointing out, in a time when, the legislature is not looking to spend tens of millions of dollars extra a year on everything we want. Something that could be done that people in the community want, that could be presented at a reasonable cost or a very low cost. It seems like something we could be working on. It would take some time, as Brian said, to develop the actual language and how to make it work with the existing systems we have here. But that seems like a reasonable thing to work on.
I think we'll have a lot of community buy-in for that too, because it doesn't matter where you're from, how much money you have, like it's affecting everybody and who has a child that elopes, which like my son, for example, he's not so much a runner, but he's a wanderer, silent wanderer. And the other day, we were outside painting a banner for my husband. He was coming home and my 3-year-old said, I need to go in and potty. And we were right there in front of our house. And we were painting, so everybody was in, not everybody, the children were in their pull-ups and they were painting. And I walked in the house and put her on the potty right there by the door. And I came out and he was gone. And he does not run. He physically cannot run. He can walk very fast. I learned that day because I was like, oh, well, I have time. I did not have time. He let himself in our neighbor's back door in the garage in his pull-up and was laying on this man's couch. He's a nice man, but I don't know him well enough for my child to be in his house in his diaper alone. And he had fully made himself at home there. Just no sense of danger. I have a deadbolt that automatically locks on the door. I mean, I have done all the things. We have cameras in the front yard. I have done all the things and it still isn't, even though I'm hyper vigilant and aware of it. One says they need to pee and you run to put them on the potty and the other one is gone. It is just.
In the blink of an eye.
It's necessary. And if I were to call the police and they would say, oh, we'll be there in a little bit, you know, I'm sure he'll come back. I'm sure he just wandered off. They don't understand the capacity and the danger of a child like mine who cannot speak or has no sense of danger. You know, a lot of them don't understand that. And, yeah, it could have been detrimental, so. Just wanted to share.
And I do know there are a handful of organizations that are saying that they were planning on doing something around this, so you probably do have quite a few groups that have expressed interest in maybe tackling it. Now, do those groups come together? I don't know. But I will say one thing though, I did not look at the legislation for all of these in particular, like read it in depth. It's just, I know, I spoke with someone because they called the office about this and their thing was if we had our own alert, you know, they would be more responsive because they would know. And I don't know how you address that part just through an alert, because I would think if an Amber Alert goes out, that is a child that is missing, that should be a top priority for everyone. So I don't know how a standalone alert is supposed to change anything. So I don't know if there was written in any legislation in some of these other states, or if there is a thought process of trying to figure out how you. I mean, it's up to the police to essentially issue this alert, send in the information to issue this alert. And so it's my understanding, at least in some of the examples that people have brought to me, that maybe that response time was not quick enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that a specific alert addresses that. It does, once the alert is issued, let everyone know. If you know what, let's say, a purple alert is, you know that, okay, this is a child that has an intellectual or developmental disability. But I don't know that it addresses the urgency that a police force or whoever it is that would be issuing these alerts. That's the part I don't know. I don't know if there's a thought. And that's more in the weeds probably than in this committee of how you would want to address that.
Christina?
So
I'm not sure about a standalone alert, but I know if it was attached to the regular Amber alerting system, not only would it go out once the police reported it through other media channels, how we normally receive it, it goes onto the DOTD signs while people are driving. It goes onto the lottery machines. So if I'm not sure how a standing alone alert would look with writing legislation for that, but I do know if it was attached to the Amber alerting system that we have now, that we would also have more than likely, I don't want to be presumptuous, but access to having those things in flux through DOTD, lottery, all of those things as well, which are huge identifiers when you have an Amber alert going out. I think another big thing to think about is sometimes there's time constraints, like if an adult is missing, you have to wait a certain X amount of time, whatever. I know that there's not one like that for children, but if we're doing children and adults and one alert, that's something that we need to consider, that there be no time constraints on when this alert is issued. It's the moment that the person is reported missing. Because I know with Amber alerts that can get a little sticky when reporting someone who's missing over the age of 13, I believe it is. And so those are things to consider is timeliness. If we did have a standalone alert, would it still be pushed out through the same channels as our regular Amber Alert system? Technicalities to get the biggest, push and awareness out there when an incident like that occurs.
Yeah, I would envision you would push it out through all the same mechanisms that currently Amber and Silver alerts go out. I think my thought process or my statements were targeting the initiating of the alert, as Christina mentioned that time frame. Because yes, once you put the alert out, then it gets pushed out to people, but what are those requirements to get to that point? Especially if it's not something that maybe the agency prioritized getting out as quickly as they should have. I don't think that is something you can fully address in this particular alert legislation. But yeah, you might, like Christina mentioned, maybe put some timeframes that you have to get something out. But anything else under the protection and rights piece?
No.
Did y'all
Y'all want to break for lunch? 12,
You can
15 to 1?
to one, yes.
Everyone's okay with-
We'll be back ready to roll at 1 PM and you guys will finish going through this information and then really start thinking about what you would like to see on your agenda. Or recommend on your agenda.